During a tense Senate hearing on federal spending, Senator Elizabeth Warren launched into a fiery critique of policies she claimed favored billionaires over working families. Her voice was sharp, filled with urgency. She accused Republican lawmakers, including Senator John Kennedy, of perpetuating inequality and ignoring the struggles of everyday Americans. Her words drew murmurs of approval from her allies. But when she directed her focus squarely at Kennedy, the room tensed. The confrontation had begun, and few expected what would happen next. Kennedy sat still, expression unreadable. As Warren accused him of enabling corporate tax loopholes and ignoring working-class Americans, he leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together. Instead of immediately responding, he allowed her to finish uninterrupted, a rare move in heated Senate exchanges. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers watching live could feel the anticipation building. Warren's barrage was forceful, filled with statistics and ideological claims. But Kennedy was planning something. He waited for the perfect moment to strike back. When Warren concluded her monologue, she expected either deflection or denial. Instead, Kennedy paused, then asked calmly, "Senator, did you actually read the bill you're referring to?" The question sliced through the chamber like a knife. Warren looked momentarily stunned, clearly not expecting such a direct and disarming reply. The silence that followed amplified the impact of Kennedy's words. Even seasoned political observers could sense the tables beginning to turn in that exact moment. Warren attempted to regain control, saying she was very familiar with the legislation. But Kennedy had already reached into a thick folder of printed documents and began reading line by line from the very bill she had attacked. His voice was slow and deliberate. He read specific passages that contradicted her claims, pointing out how several tax provisions were specifically written to protect small businesses and lower-income families. The tone shifted. What started as an offensive turned into a defensive scramble. As Kennedy laid out his facts, he never raised his voice. His calmness became his greatest weapon. Warren, growing visibly irritated, tried to pivot by bringing up unrelated policies. But Kennedy stuck to the bill. He cited budget analysis reports, nonpartisan studies, and the Congressional Budget Office. One by one, he dismantled her arguments with surgical precision. His approach wasn't theatrical, it was calculated. He wasn't there to win applause. He was there to win the point. Then came the moment that would go viral within hours. As Warren interrupted him again mid-sentence, Kennedy lifted his hand gently and replied, "Ma'am, I don't need a lecture from someone who thinks math is a form of oppression." Gasps filled the room. The line was brutal, not personal, but piercing. It struck at the heart of Warren's argument style. Within seconds, that quote was clipped and posted across social media platforms, igniting a wildfire of reactions. The most striking part of Kennedy's comeback wasn't just the line, it was his demeanor. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply continued with his analysis, as though the viral moment never happened. The contrast between his calm delivery and the explosive nature of his words made them even more powerful. Warren, uncharacteristically speechless, adjusted her papers and remained silent for the next several minutes. She knew she had lost control of the narrative. News outlets scrambled to get the clip. It aired on major networks and political YouTube channels within the hour. Headlines called it the Senate Smackdown, Kennedy's masterstroke, and Warren's worst moment. Political commentators debated whether Kennedy had crossed a line or simply exposed the senator's lack of preparation. Polls on Twitter showed overwhelming support for Kennedy's performance, especially among independent and undecided viewers who valued clarity over volume. Behind the scenes, even some Democratic staffers admitted the moment was bad optics for Warren. One aide, speaking anonymously, said, "We didn't expect him to come this prepared. He wasn't just confident, he had the receipts." Indeed, Kennedy's printed folder became a symbol of preparedness. In a political world dominated by talking points, he showed up with facts, citations, and undeniable proof. And that made all the difference. Warren was left searching for a new angle. Kennedy's staff released a short statement after the hearing, emphasizing his commitment to truth-based governance. The message was subtle but clear. While some politicians rely on emotion and performance, Kennedy leans on facts and the rule of law. Supporters flooded social media with praise, calling him the adult in the room and a voice of reason. Even critics had to admit, He had outmaneuvered Warren with poise and intelligence. It wasn't just a win, it was a masterclass. The aftermath online was swift and massive. Within hours, the video clip reached millions across platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Conservative commentators hailed it as a turning point in exposing what they viewed as performative outrage politics. Even neutral observers remarked on Kennedy's sharpness and ability to control the room without ever appearing aggressive. Meanwhile, progressive circles were noticeably quiet. Warren's official channels offered no response. The silence spoke volumes. It was damage control in real time. Media outlets quickly picked up contrasting narratives. Fox News and conservative sites called it a Senate schooling, while more liberal platforms attempted to redirect attention to broader policy debates. Still, few could deny that Kennedy's dismantling of Warren's position was precise and powerful. His method of rebuttal, point-by-point disassembly backed by direct quotes, left no space for spin. Viewers across the political spectrum found something oddly satisfying about seeing clarity win over chaos. On Capitol Hill, the mood shifted the following day. Kennedy walked through the corridors greeted by subtle nods, even from those who typically disagreed with him. His performance had resonated not just with the public, but with fellow lawmakers. Respect in the Senate isn't easily earned, and it's even harder to maintain. But Kennedy's ability to stay measured under pressure had set him apart. He didn't win by attacking character. He won by defending the truth. Warren's team tried to move the spotlight away from the hearing. Her next public statement focused on broader economic justice issues. She didn't reference Kennedy or the bill again. It was a calculated retreat. Analysts noted how uncharacteristic that was for her, someone who usually doubles down in political fights. Her silence told insiders everything they needed to know. This wasn't just a bad look. It was a strategic defeat, and she knew it. Commentators began drawing comparisons to past Senate confrontations. Some likened Kennedy's moment to past viral Senate takedowns, where one well-timed remark shifted the public narrative. But others said this moment stood out because of its composure. Kennedy didn't grandstand. He didn't shout or insult. He let the facts do the talking. In a political era dominated by noise and outrage, his calm voice was deafening. And that made all the difference in perception. In political circles, perception often matters more than reality. Warren may still believe in the policy she defended, but perception painted her as ill-prepared. Meanwhile, Kennedy was cast as a man in control of his data, his words, and his opponent. The memes, merchandise, and viral reactions weren't about the bill. They were about the performance. And in that realm, Kennedy had emerged as a breakout star in a very public theater. Behind closed doors, Democrats held meetings to analyze what had gone wrong. Staffers reportedly urged Warren to avoid future direct confrontations unless fully equipped with counterdata. One insider said, "We underestimated him. That won't happen again." Kennedy, meanwhile, showed no interest in victory laps. He refused interviews with several major networks, sticking to his regular schedule. That choice added to his image as someone focused on governance, not spotlight, a rare stance in today's media-hungry politics. The Senate floor is often a battleground of ideologies, but this clash was different. It wasn't Democrat versus Republican, it was preparation versus presumption. Kennedy prepared, Warren presumed. The consequences were visible not just in media clips, but in the national conversation that followed. People were tired of scripted outrage. Kennedy offered something fresh, unshakable focus and detailed arguments. It was less about charisma, more about credibility. And credibility, in this case, won. The public response revealed a hunger for seriousness in politics. Americans across ideological lines are frustrated by performative debates that solve nothing. Kennedy's moment cut through that noise. It showed what happens when someone refuses to play the usual partisan game and instead treats every hearing like a trial. His style resonated because it was rare. He didn't try to entertain. He tried to inform, and he did it while defending his position with grace. Think tanks and policy analysts began re-evaluating the bill itself. With newfound attention, experts dug deeper into the legislation Warren had criticized. To the surprise of many, they found Kennedy's reading accurate. Several clauses indeed favored small businesses and middle-income families. Warren's critiques, though emotionally compelling, lacked precise grounding. This only reinforced the broader message. Emotional appeals fall flat when faced with sharp, detailed rebuttals. Kennedy didn't just win the moment. He redefined the debate. As discussions continued, even late-night hosts couldn't ignore the moment. Some joked about how Kennedy brought a binder while Warren brought assumptions. Others replayed the now viral quote about math, drawing laughs from studio audiences. But behind the humor was an undeniable truth. Kennedy had forced the country to reconsider what effective political argument looks like. It's not shouting or blaming. It's knowing your material and remaining composed while under fire. That resonated more than anyone expected. Think pieces flooded major opinion columns. Journalists from both liberal and conservative outlets dissected the exchange in detail. What struck most writers was how Kennedy seemed to flip the script. Typically, Republicans are on the defensive when it comes to wealth inequality debates. But Kennedy turned the tables by showing how policy can be misrepresented through selective reading. His ability to quote the bill verbatim gave him immediate authority in the room, something few senators ever accomplished so cleanly. Warren's allies tried to defend her broader point, arguing that the spirit of her message remained important. But public discourse is rarely about abstract themes. It's about performance, specifics, and clarity. Kennedy didn't attack her values. He exposed the weakness in her preparation. That's what made it so damaging. When a politician fails to fact-check their own talking points, it creates a vulnerability that can be devastating when highlighted live on national television. Meanwhile, Kennedy gained unexpected support from moderates and even some centrist Democrats. Editorials praised him not just for his words, but for his demeanor. In a time when political communication is increasingly theatrical, his approach felt refreshingly old school. It was about substance, not spectacle. And it wasn't just one viral line. It was an entire strategy of steady dismantling. Warren may have thrown the first punch, but Kennedy landed the ones that counted. Political strategists began citing the exchange in seminars and campaign prep meetings. Be like Kennedy became shorthand for staying calm, citing your sources, and letting your opponent fall on their own rhetorical sword. It was a masterclass in preparation and timing. Candidates across the country started watching the video not for entertainment, but for tactics. How Kennedy waited, how he asked questions, how he never raised his voice. These were now political study points. Some questioned whether the moment would have the same impact if the roles were reversed. Would a Democrat calmly dismantling a Republican go viral the same way? The answer isn't simple. But what made Kennedy's moment stand out was its authenticity. There was no smugness, no rehearsed punchlines. Just a man with a stack of documents, a deep knowledge of the bill, and the confidence to let his work speak louder than outrage. That sincerity was rare. Back in Louisiana, Kennedy's home state, the reaction was overwhelming. His office reported a dramatic uptick in calls and messages of support. Constituents who hadn't engaged much with national politics before now praised his composure. One local newspaper editorial wrote, "For once, we didn't feel embarrassed watching a Senate hearing." The sentiment was shared widely. Kennedy had not only represented his party, but also his people, with sharp thinking and Southern grace. Warren, for her part, kept a low profile in the days that followed. Her media appearances became more controlled. When asked directly about the exchange, she deflected, insisting that her focus was on policy outcomes, not soundbites. But observers noted a shift. The firebrand energy had dulled. She looked more cautious, more scripted. That shift might have been tactical, but it also suggested the impact of being publicly outmatched by someone who didn't even raise his voice. Over time, the Senate moved on to other battles. Budget discussions, judicial nominations, committee hearings. But the Kennedy-Warren exchange remained etched in recent memory. It was replayed during new debates as an example of how things should be done, or how they should not. Political commentators used it as a litmus test. Do you want to emulate emotional appeals or evidence-based clarity? Kennedy's performance became a benchmark, a gold standard for Senate discourse. Months later, during a policy summit, Kennedy was asked directly about the moment. He smiled and said, "I didn't go there to win a debate. I went there to clarify the facts." That one line summarized everything. He didn't see it as a battle. He saw it as his job. And that's what made it so effective. When you're more interested in truth than Twitter, your words carry more weight, even in the loudest room. Students of political science began analyzing the moment in classrooms. Professors created assignments based on the exchange, asking students to assess argument styles, rhetorical strategy, and the importance of preparation. One university even held a debate night themed around the Kennedy method, encouraging students to adopt his tone and approach. What was once a single Senate moment had become a teaching tool, a blueprint for how not to get rattled when the spotlight hits hardest. As the election cycle heated up, campaign teams reviewed the footage again. Opposition research teams scoured Warren's record, wondering if another misstep could create a repeat of the Kennedy incident. Meanwhile, Republican candidates clipped the moment into their ads, using it to show how their party values facts over fury. But for Kennedy, none of this was the goal. He kept his head down, continued his work, and let others debate what his words had meant. In time, memes faded, and the media moved on to new controversies. But what endured was the lesson. It wasn't about humiliation, it was about contrast. Kennedy never tried to own his opponent. He just showed up more prepared. And in today's climate, that's revolutionary. For every politician eager to shout, Kennedy demonstrated the power of being deliberate. For every viral rant, he showed the impact of quiet conviction. That subtlety spoke louder than any outburst. You could argue that Kennedy did more than win an argument. He shifted the expectations. In future hearings, senators came more prepared. Their staffers double-checked data. The tone changed, slightly but noticeably. A calm, focused presence was no longer seen as passive, it was seen as powerful. All because one senator decided not to match fire with fire, but with cold, hard facts. In that moment, he changed not just a narrative, but the rules of engagement. Washington is often a place of showmanship and spectacle. Soundbites are crafted for headlines. Anger is leveraged for attention. But Kennedy didn't play that game. He flipped the script. And whether you agreed with his politics or not, it was hard not to respect his method. It was a moment of adult leadership in a room often filled with petty squabbles. He proved that intelligence, timing, and humility could still dominate the conversation. Some may say it was just a Senate moment, one among thousands. But history is often shaped by small instances that represent larger truths. Kennedy's confrontation with Warren wasn't about scoring points. It was about setting a tone. And that tone carried far beyond one hearing room. It made people rethink what leadership looks like. And for that reason alone, the moment will continue to be remembered long after headlines fade away. Even international media took notice. Outlets in Europe and Asia covered the exchange, intrigued by the rare civility and clarity in such a polarized environment. Foreign analysts praised Kennedy's delivery, comparing it to parliamentary decorum rather than U.S. political theater. It became an example of how American politics could be respected again, not for the noise, but for the nuance. That kind of cross-border recognition is rare, and it amplified the reach of his message. Elizabeth Warren eventually regained her footing in other debates, but the shadow of that exchange lingered. Every new statement she made on tax reform drew closer scrutiny. People wanted to know, was it accurate? Was it prepared? Kennedy's performance had recalibrated the bar. From that point forward, it wasn't enough to be passionate. You had to be precise. And that's a standard few expected to be set by a soft-spoken senator from Louisiana. In political war rooms, Kennedy's name came up more frequently, not as a firebrand, but as a model of control. He didn't energize with outrage. He neutralized with facts. Campaign managers told candidates, study how he handled it. And they did. Debate coaches referenced his calm pivot points. Communication strategists built mock sessions around his line delivery. It was a full circle moment, a seasoned politician quietly becoming a new benchmark for rhetorical strength. The debate marked a turning point in Senate conduct. Not immediately, not radically, but noticeably. Politicians on both sides became more cautious in using numbers they couldn't defend. Staffers prepared thicker briefing books. Viewers at home paid closer attention to not just what was said, but how it was said. Kennedy had, perhaps unintentionally, revived the idea that intellect and strategy are mightier than volume. That shift alone is an underrated legacy of the entire incident. For Kennedy's supporters, the moment was confirmation. For his critics, it was a challenge. For everyone watching, it was a reminder. Never underestimate someone who does their homework. Whether you saw him as a hero or a tactician, it was impossible to ignore the effectiveness of his approach. And in today's distracted media landscape, Cutting through the noise with calm authority is one of the hardest things to do. He did it effortlessly. Elizabeth Warren's team, over time, adjusted. Her future debates came with thicker notes, sharper facts, and fewer sweeping generalizations. She learned. And in politics, even a loss can be a teacher. But for Kennedy, the hearing wasn't a peek. It was just a glimpse of what disciplined advocacy looks like. He didn't claim victory. He didn't spike the ball. He simply demonstrated what happens when someone shows up fully armed with truth and patience. It's tempting to reduce the event to a soundbite. One viral moment. One sentence. But that would ignore the architecture Kennedy built leading up to that moment. Every citation. Every quote. Every moment of silence. It all worked together to create something rare in American politics. A win based purely on preparation. Not tribalism. Not theatrics. Just homework. And in the end, that might be what made it so enduring and so instructive. In conclusion, the showdown between John Kennedy and Elizabeth Warren became far more than just another heated Senate exchange. It symbolized a deeper hunger for honesty, preparation, and professionalism in politics. Kennedy didn't win because he yelled louder. He won because he knew more. And he let that knowledge speak for itself. That's why this moment matters. That's why it continues to echo today. It wasn't just a line. It was a lesson. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who care about real leadership and smart political debate. Let's raise the standard, together.